Okay, welcome everyone. It's 12:30 and we're going to get started. The name of the session is Equity is Not a Destination. My name is Shonda Talene and I am a patent consultant in the Harrisburg office. Just a reminder that this is a 60-minute session and it is being recorded. The session is also closed captioned. If you would like to turn on the closed captioning, please look at your buttons on the bottom and there is a button for live transcript. And you should be able to click on that and have closed captioning. I will be putting in the chat a link to our Summit webpage. So I would just encourage you to access that page to locate handouts, the Summit agenda, as well as session descriptions. There, you can use the chat for questions. Dr. Amira Hill-Yancey will leave the last 5 minutes of the session for questions, so please put your questions in the chat that are content related. I will be giving you a code at the end of the session that you will be utilizing in order to receive your credits. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Amira Hill-Yancey.
Thank you so much, Shonda. I am so excited to be here with you all today and share this presentation with you. You may have noticed that this presentation is presented in a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as I move on. So this title, Equity is Not a Destination. Equity is really not a place that you ever really arrive at, right? But we always want to be on the road. So you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here to share time and space with me, and I appreciate that. So let's go on a little ride together. So whenever we share in presentations around equity, diversity, and inclusion, we like to start with the 4 agreements of courageous conversations. And so the first agreement is to stay engaged. Now, I know that you guys might be signing on from your home, your office, your car, but I ask that you stay engaged, stay with me. And even if some things might be uncomfortable or things that you've already heard before, just hang in there with me. Also, experience discomfort. It may happen, and it's okay if it happens. It's okay if I say something that you're not quite comfortable with. You're not quite all the way there yet. That's okay. Speak your truth. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but you're going to have opportunities to share in the chat and also go into breakout rooms to have some conversations. And so I ask that you speak your truth, and your truth is how you feel, not the politically correct answer, not what you think others want to hear, but what you feel you want to say from your heart, your mind, however you choose to speak. And then the last agreement is expect and accept non-closure. So whenever I'm done in this short presentation, we won't be able to change the world. There'll be lots of questions. There'll be things that are unanswered. You'll really want to know more. You'll want to take that deeper dive, and that's okay. So when you don't have non-closure on an issue, that doesn't mean non-action. That means that you do additional research. You reach out to me. You reach out to the equity points of contact in your specific IUs. So I'd ask right now that if you are in agreement with the agreements that I've put forth, if you are okay with them, just put a yes or some indicator that you're in agreement in the chat box so that I can move forward. So I see yeses, and I want to get a few because we have about 114 people here, and I want to make sure that everyone is on board with what I'm sharing. Right? Thank you so much. Okay, so now I can move on. All right, so as I stated, you'll have the opportunity to share in the chat, and I call that the chat challenge. Anytime there's something that you need to do, it'll be highlighted in yellow on the slide. We'll also have what I call Breakout Room Fun. That'll be highlighted in yellow so that you know when it's your turn. When it comes to equity work, this isn't something that can really be a stand and deliver type session. So that's why I asked that I have a Zoom meeting rather than a webinar so that I have the opportunity to engage with you all and you have the opportunity to engage with me. I want to hear your voice, and that's equitable, allowing your voices to be heard in this session. Okay, so let's get started. Equity and cultural responsiveness. So this comes from the PCEL standard, Standard 3 on equity and cultural responsiveness. Effective educational leaders strive for equity of educational opportunity and culturally responsive practices to promote each student's academic success and well-being. And I think that's a nice way to really summarize what it means to be equitable and culturally responsive in your practice. But one sentence, although it summarizes it in one sentence and it gives us that high level overview, there's so much more that goes into making this possible. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today on this journey that we'll take. So I'm going to start with a quote from a rapper, Nipsey Hussle. And I thought that this quote was very appropriate to kind of get this session started. Most people want to skip the process, not knowing that when you skip steps, you miss the lessons. If you start small and build on what you have, you can continue to multiply that into something greater while picking up all of the valuable lessons along the way. And I think that's really good as we get in our car or our SUV and start this journey to think about the lessons that can be learned along the way when you're starting this equity work. Now, I realize that each person represented here may be in a different place on their equity journey, and that's okay. So wherever you are, you can pick up and gain some information that'll be valuable and support you as you continue on the journey. So equity-focused leaders. These are things that equity-focused leaders do. Directly address the mismatch between BIPOC students and the adults who teach and lead them. So eliminating, right, this idea of cultural dissonance. So those mismatches occur that when students enter the classrooms with cultures that differ from the teachers in front of them, we're doing things to mitigate those differences and eliminating that dissonance that occurs as much as possible. Continuously reorienting themselves toward educational equity. So as new things occur, as new information is revealed, that pivot occurs, right? And you guys already do that as leaders. Building the capacity of teachers, and we're going to talk more about that, to implement those practices, those culturally responsive practices in classrooms is key. As leaders, you are the educational leaders and you're guiding your teachers to be educational leaders in their spaces. And that's really important to give them that time and space to do that. Approach school discipline with equity in mind. And we know that we often see significant disproportionality for BIPOC students. And I will define BIPOC because some people may not be familiar. So BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so that's a term that sort of gathers all people, non-white people, essentially. And so often significant disproportionality occurs in discipline areas. So really being mindful of what it means to be equitable in disciplinary practices. And then purposefully engaging in a diverse range with families and allowing them to participate in your school, in your district's work. And so that idea of family engagement, not just involvement, not just sort of having back to school night, but actually having families involved in decision making is really important. And I'll talk more about that. So when we talk about equity and culturally responsive practices in leadership, I always start with the will, feel, and skill. And so as leaders, you need to have the will, that desire to lead. And I'll talk more about how those smaller points of the will play out in a framework called the Culturally Responsive Leadership Framework. But after that will, that desire to lead is established, so it's like knowing yourself and examining the systems and having a belief that all your students will learn. And notice that it says will learn, not can learn, but will learn, right? So there's that focus on ensuring that we get that job done. And then there's the feel. So gaining cultural knowledge, like really being aware. So you need to understand yourself and your own culture, but now you have to understand the unique individuals that are in your school buildings and understanding like these unique worldviews. Because even if you are a leader in a school district that's homogeneous, so you may have only one school culture represented in your school. Maybe there's only one race represented in your school, or very small amounts of diversity in your school or your district. You still need to have an understanding of equity, because we are educating students to go into a world where there's so much diversity and so many different people, and we want to make sure that students are prepared to compete in a global economy when they leave our school districts. And so it's important that everybody has this awareness, and it's not just for certain students, or it's not just for traditional marginalized students or students who are part of a BIPOC community. Also knowing the community in which you teach. And so that's important, because you want to make sure that if you have that family involvement, that community involvement is there as well. And then the skill. So really applying knowledge. So leading, being an advocate, modeling your behavior, accepting institutional responsibility, really realizing that there may have been some policies that disproportionately negatively impacted certain populations of students. And that's okay that it existed, but we want to apply our knowledge to change those things moving forward. And then in addition, using practices in curriculum that respects all students' cultures. So culturally responsive and sustaining educational practices, utilizing texts that represent all groups of students, are just a few ways that can be done. In addition, we want to consider the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships. Now, remember, I said that this is really a key component to ensuring that there are equitable practices and equitable leadership occurring. You have to have that family voice. So the first thing that must be done is a consideration of the challenges must be made. And so there are two types of challenges, right? So there are educator challenges and there are family challenges. So for educators, have they not been exposed to strong examples of family engagement? So do you even really know what that looks like? Do they have training, right, on how to engage with families? Because it's not just something that you do. You need to have a really good foundation in that. And they may not have seen partnerships as an essential practice. Like sometimes educators may see families as on the outside. I do the work in school, you do the work out of school, and our paths shall never cross. And that's just not a good way of thinking. There definitely has to be that consistent collaboration, communication, and connection between family, home, and school. And so then on the part of families, had they not been exposed to it, again, those strong examples, had they had negative experiences for themselves as parents and then as students, had they had negative experiences with teachers and now they don't even feel comfortable interacting with teachers because of their experiences? Sometimes they may not feel invited if they come to school. If they reach out to their child's teacher, they don't really get a response. How that impacts parents and families and their engagement is important as well. And then feeling disrespected, unheard, or undervalued. And sometimes that may occur, especially in special education with IEP team meetings where families may not feel heard. And so we want to make sure that we are considering these challenges as we consider the conditions. So those essential conditions fall into two categories, and it's process conditions and organizational conditions. And so the process conditions involve like this relational aspect. So this idea of having mutual trust, and it's really linked to learning and development for teachers. And then asset-based. So getting away from that deficit perspective of students and really relying on students' assets to make a determination of their needs. Having cultural responsiveness, culturally responsive practices and teaching habits, and respectfulness of culture. And then collaboration and interaction. Now, those organizational conditions are systemic, so really that are embraced by leadership. And so that's why you guys are so important, because it's a trickle-down effect. If the leaders are on board, then things happen, right? And so it's integrated, it's embedded in all strategies. And so if we're going to be more equitable, it's not just something that occurs in a silo, but it's something that occurs in all policies, in all procedures, in all practices. And then it needs to be sustainable, right? We need to be able to build capacity so that it is occurring across the board and there are resources available and infrastructures are actually changed to ensure that it's sustained. Next, we consider policy and program goals. And so we focus on the 4 C's: capability, so skills and knowledge on both educators and families; connection, so those networks that are being built amongst families and with educators, with school leaders; cognition, and this one is really difficult. So it's that shift in beliefs, it's that paradigm shift, that understanding the difference in the role of a family. And it's not just the folks who come to pick up report cards, and that it's this one-way communication where I tell you everything that your child has done or hasn't done, and then you receive it. So there needs to be two-way communication where we're listening to families as well. And then confidence, this self-efficacy, this ability as a family to advocate for my child, feel very proud of my ability to advocate and that idea that I'm heard. But then also on the part of school leaders and teachers, we want to make sure that there's that self-efficacy and feeling confident and comfortable in having those ongoing conversations with families. And so it's definitely takes more than a notion, but I like the way that this is laid out, and it really gives all of the components that get us to these capacity outcomes. Because essentially what we want is effective partnerships that support not only the student, but school improvement as well. Because when students are doing well, the whole system is doing well, right? That's the end point, student success. But that student success, it's that trickle down approach, but also it goes up. So when students are successful, then other things fall in line in school as well. And so we want to make sure that we create that space for families to support their children as they work to be successful. All right. So we're going to talk about just the 5 leadership dispositions. And so these 5 leadership dispositions just flow very nicely into the culturally responsive school leadership framework. And so these 5 dispositions say that leaders reflect on their personal assumptions, beliefs, and behaviors, publicly model a personal belief system that is student-centered and grounded in equity. And again, this goes back to that will, right? Act with cultural competence and responsiveness in interactions, decision-making, and practice. Confront and alter institutional biases to students that are traditionally marginalized. Get rid of the deficit-based expectations and low expectations. And then create systems and structures that promote equity for all students, right? And it's not just about race, but it's all students, whether it's students with disabilities, students who are a part of the LGBTQIA+ community, students who have a religion that's like the minority religion in a school district, right? We want to make sure that everyone is treated with equity. So we're going to go into the culturally responsive school leadership framework, and there are 4 tenets or principles that make up this framework. So I love a quote, and we'll see them throughout this presentation. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. And I really love that, because it's so, if you ever hear that quote, when you have one finger pointing at someone else, you have, I guess, the other 4 pointing at yourself. So really, this first principle talks about being self-reflective, critically self-reflective on your own leadership behaviors. And you ask yourself questions like, do I seek out and listen to a diverse group of voices when making decisions about our school? Do I ask myself, how policy or procedural changes will affect students and faculty who come from traditionally marginalized groups? Do I seek to hire a staff that reflects the diversity of our school or district community and its surrounding areas? Do I do so only so students of a particular race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation will see themselves on staff? Or is it so that we all understand that we all learn from many? Do I allow myself to be vulnerable with my school community? Does every member of the school community feel safe letting me know when I make a mistake, especially when the mistake comes from a lack of cultural competence? Do I work to ensure that there is not one standard of excellence at my school, but rather multiple pathways for students to have academic and social success? Do I intentionally use anti-racist, anti-heteronormative, and explicitly accepting language? Just some things to think about as we talk about that self-reflection, that review of who you are, your social identity, the biases that you may have about certain groups of students. And we all have biases. They're the norm, right? Everyone has a bias of folks that are not in their in-group, and that's okay, but it's what we do once we know that those biases exist that really matters. Right. So you see, when our attitudes outdistance our abilities, even the impossible becomes possible. And so with that, we want to ensure that we develop culturally responsive teachers as school leaders. And so that means like giving support and guidance to teachers in their assessment of their own behavior, like their own self-awareness. What are they doing, right? So when you make that consideration of self-awareness of yourself, now guiding teachers to do that same work and allow and encourage opportunities to get to know students. And I know that that seems like a no-brainer, but oftentimes that school year is off and running and time really isn't taken for teachers to get to know their students, like who they are really. And so when I was a special education teacher, and I know that this broke all the rules, but I took almost that first month of school to really get to know my students and not only get to know them, but allow them to get to know me as well. Now, obviously there was content in there, but really taking those opportunities to understand who students are. And that, I wouldn't say eliminates, but significantly minimizes behavioral issues because you've had that opportunity to engage with students and really understand who they are and what makes them tick and what they bring from home and how that can collide with school culture. Also providing PD and giving space for teachers to adapt their teaching so that there's that student-centered approach, this idea of constructivism where no longer teachers are the sage on stage, but allowing students to kind of craft their own learning. And it takes more than a notion to do that, and it takes time. And so allowing that space for teachers is so important. And I know time is the one thing that we wish we had more of, but being thoughtful and scheduling and allowing for collaborative opportunities amongst teachers is so important. Next, promotes cultural, responsive, inclusive school environment. So examples of this is like changing policies and procedures to support the development of a more inclusive environment, creating a safe environment of courageous conversations so that folks have the conversations that are necessary. If you notice that a policy is significantly impacting a certain group of students in a negative way, talking about that policy. If there are texts that really aren't representative of the school, of the students, or if they have a biased view, or if there's something that's just not quite right, having that space to start that conversation and not feel like they'll be penalized for it is important. Allocating resources as necessary, and then really policies need to reflect the changes in community demographics. So if you notice that there's an influx of a certain population of students moving in and policies that previously existed may negatively impact those students, considering making changes to those policies so that everyone has access to a school environment that is safe and equitable for them. And finally, engage students, parents, and Indigenous contexts. So improved academic outcomes and attendance are the goals, right? We want our students there and we want them to do well while they're there. So we really want to empower parents to be engaged in school and make sure that they are able to make requests on behalf of their students. And having just those general connections with the families and communities. And when we talk about Indigenous context, that's really a community context. So really bringing the community in, polling the community, taking that information from the community and implementing changes based on that feedback from the community. An Indigenous context comes from Indigenous peoples who live in communities and they value the idea of having a community approach to supporting all students, right? And that comes from even like an African proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child. So really having that village approach, having everyone on board and providing input and feedback to ensure you're doing the best for all students. So what can you do? And that's always a question that I get when I do these presentations, like, what can I do immediately? And I like to say, what you can do immediately is like, think about who you are, think about your behaviors, really focus on that self-awareness. So be reflective, right? Start with that reflectiveness and then be responsive, be proactive. And if you are a PBIS person, you get that. But be reflective, be responsive, be proactive. Okay. So if we're talking about what we can do, let's talk about what we shouldn't do. So what we really should not do is get into these equity traps and tropes. And so the first one is doing equity. And sometimes educators treat equity as like a series of tools and strategies and compliance tasks versus taking a whole person, whole system change approach that's really linked to culture, identity, belonging, and healing. Okay, so really just changing that viewpoint on what doing equity is. What does it mean to be more equitable? Siloing equity, so just ensuring that equity work isn't like the separate thing that's done over there and you kind of look at it every now and again to make sure that it's there, but it's not really embedded in everything that you do. Equitable practices, equitable thinking should be involved in all decision making. It should be involved in how you, when you review your policies and your procedures that exist, and really in your hiring practices. So when we think about those 3 Ps, we want to make sure that equity is not an afterthought, but it's something that's always occurring. We want to avoid the equity warrior. And that's that person who is, fighting the good fight while everyone else can just sort of be complacent and kind of not have to think about themselves, not really be self-aware, not make any changes, not change their thinking or even considering what their thinking is. It's just that one person that's just on the battlefield fighting the good fight for equity. And they almost become like a martyr. And we don't want to see that. We don't want to burn people out. This should be, if equitable practices are going to be sustained, it needs to occur across the board and it can't just be one person. And so then we have spray and pray equity. And this is something that I ask people to avoid as much as possible. People love to say, hey, Amira, can you come in and do a training during the summer at the start of the school year? And then we've checked off our equity box and we hope that what you said will make a change. And that's just not, it just doesn't work that way. And I don't do one and done trainings. If you're not interested in being vested in this work and doing the work over time, then I typically will say no to training requests. Then there's the blanket equity, and it's that equity, it's just compliance. We want to make sure that, again, those boxes are checked off and we are not really considering individual student needs, but it's just, we're doing equity across the board, and that's what it's going to be, right? And so that's really not sustainable. Boomerang equity is when you take the time to identify issues. So let's say you find an issue with disproportionality and you implement a solution, and the solution may not be the right solution. It may not work. And so instead of going back to the drawing board and trying to, find additional assessments and really take a deeper dive into what the issue is and how to resolve it, you just go back to doing what you've always done. And so that boomerang effect of going back to what it was before you even identified the problem. And it really helps no one. And it wastes the time of those folks who took the time to figure out what the issue was if we're not going to really work to try to resolve it. And then tokenizing equity. That's when you have that one BIPOC person in your district and they become the equity champion. And they become that person that you go to for all things equity. You ask all your questions. And sometimes that can be overwhelming for people, especially if that's not a job or something that they're interested in upholding. You have some people who will talk about marginalized groups and intersectionality and how that can impact students, and they're very interested in it. And then you have some BIPOC people who really don't want to have those conversations, who don't have that comfort level. So going to the one person who is non-white in your district or your school building and kind of putting that work on them and not really having that conversation to see if they're interested is tokenizing equity. And we want to make sure that we stay away from that. All right, so I told you, now here comes the part where you engage with me. This is our chat challenge. So what can you do to avoid equity traps and tropes? Put it in the chat and I'll be reading them, and we'll take about 2 minutes to do that now. Positive behavior intervention and supports the MTSS for behavior. All right, I want to see some more responses in here. Okay, assign meetings to follow up on plans and effectiveness. Yes, I love that. First step is awareness. Previous slide was helpful. Randomized selection. I'm not sure what that means. Intentional planning for equity. Yes, use of behavior interventions. Reflect, model, follow up, and be consistent. I love that, Mary Ann. Focus on self-reflection. Yes, that is so key. That's really the foundation, Valerie. Thank you. Create a plan for equity, not just isolated trainings or meetings. Yes, Ed, thank you so much. Professional development for all staff to speak a common language. Ooh, Ryan, I like that. Tell me more. Elaine, book clubs, self-education. Yes, book clubs, book studies are amazing. Gather feedback. Yes, what are we going to do with that feedback, Lisa? Tell me. Increased awareness and monitoring my thoughts and responses. Yes, Sarah, thank you. Be vested in truly taking on equity program-wide. Yes, thank you, Clarissa. Look at the curriculum, books, and material. Yes, Mary, that is so important. Restorative practices. Tara, you get a gold star. Yes. Educate staff, PLCs. Yes, yes. Not only include families, but students as well, to hear from them. Yes, Diane, student voice is very important. Yes, 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 yes. Incorporate reflection points throughout training and instructional practices. Yes, I don't know what your name is because it's sort of all run together, but I think it's Anastasia, and Anastasia, you rock. Yes, 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 yes. I agree that professional development for all staff is important. All right, this is great. Thank you. Please keep posting as you think through that. And I am going to move on because I want to make sure that I have time to get to everything. I am very aware that I put way too much content in this training, but I just wanted to give you guys a taste of everything. And so hopefully this will pique your curiosity. This will support what you're already doing. You might call myself or Shonda and say, hey guys, we really want to start doing this work and we want your support and your guidance, and we'll be happy to support you in that way. But I am going to move on to Cotter's 8-step process for leading change. And so this model comes sort of out of the business world, but I really believe it can be generalized for anything. And it kind of gives us this foundation of like what we need to be doing, what we need to look for as we're on this journey of leading change. And so if you've already seen this, then drop comments in the chat. If I'm off track and you're like, hey, Amira, I really want you to, think about it in this way, whatever you want to share, please use the chat to do so. And if you have questions, put them in the chat as well. So step one is create a sense of urgency. Now, this really means that you want to describe the work in a way that appeals to not only heads, but also hearts, because this work involves a change of heart. So I say that this is hard work, but it's heart work as well. And so you want to use that statement that you develop to raise a large, urgent army of people who volunteer to do this work. Equity is not work that you should be voluntold to do, right? And so you want to have that bold, aspirational opportunity statement that really hits home on how important and how urgent this work is. And when I tell you it's important, it is urgent and it is important because our kids' lives depend on it, okay? So step two, build a guiding coalition. And this is an opportunity to engage with people in your building and in your district beyond those usual suspects. So, you have those folks who always volunteer, who are always down for a good time. But now you want to get more people involved when you get this guiding coalition together. And so when you make these considerations, you want building level representatives. So you want secondary folks, elementary folks, folks at each grade level, folks with different types of expertise. You want families involved. You want the communities involved. You want students involved. You even want your school board involved. Like this is all hands on deck. Everybody's involved in this. So a goal without a plan, it's just a wish. And we want to get past wishing away problems and actually doing the work. And how do you do it, Amira? I'll tell you. Form a strategic vision and initiative. So when we talk about that vision and taking that initiative, the characteristics of a terrific strategic vision are that it's easily communicated. So it's not a lot of big words and people don't really understand what it says. You can sort of read it and get a good understanding of what needs to be done. It should be desirable. So work that folks want to be involved in. It creates a verbal picture. So I can visualize, right, for my literacy folks, I can visualize in my head what your vision is by the words that you have documented. It's flexible, right? Because this isn't work that it's very stringent and it's sort of just this one way and it like tunnel vision occurs. No, there definitely will be detours right on this road and you may need to regroup. And so having that flexibility is important. It needs to be feasible and it needs to be simple, okay? 4, enlist a volunteer army. So you can't appeal to people with just data and facts. How people feel matters. So if you can provide greater meaning and greater purpose to the work and their efforts and really people understanding that what they do really matters for outcomes for students. And I always talk about early warning system data. And when we consider that students who miss 20% or more of the school year, students have 5 office referrals or more, students who are expelled once or suspended once, students who fail either math or English or language arts are 75% more likely to drop out of high school. And what that means is we're looking at lifetime outcomes for students. So this idea of changes that we make, more equitable disciplinary practices, more equitable academic practices, and understanding who we are and how our decisions based on our implicit biases impact students. So really understanding how important we are to children's futures, giving that information to teachers, giving that information to staff, makes things possible. People should really feel awesome about changing in their thinking, changing in processes, changing in procedures, and challenging things that really disproportionately impact some students. Those things all come into play when we're getting that army together and getting them on board to do this work. So we talked about engaging every possible group of vested parties who would interact with students or who would have an impact on students' learning. I talked about all of them, and they need to be involved, but whose voices are loud and clear and whose voices are muted? And so we want to make sure that we're considering equity-focused decision-making, right? And so who is at the table when decisions are being made? What problems are you trying to solve, and for whom and by when? Does the solution actually work for this group? What are the plans for ongoing data collection, analysis, publicizing the progress and results? And all of these are necessary. We want to make sure that we have the right folks at the table, but having them at the table is one thing. Are their voices heard? And so making sure that everybody's voice is heard in decision-making and ensuring that traditionally marginalized students are getting what they need. So number 5, enable action by removing barriers. So one of the barriers that I discussed is like this silo work. Another barrier is complacency. Like, you know, it's just the way that we've always done it. It's the way that it was done by my teachers and the teachers before them, and that's just the way that it is. And we have to get away from that. And so we want to generate a real impact. And in order to do that, we have to remove those barriers. And so it's important to utilize that volunteer army to help break down barriers and increase the impact, because those boots on the ground folks, they matter and their voices matter. And so to remove the barriers, you have to identify them. You have to put a name on them and think about things like why initiatives in the past have failed, why large undertakings really kind of fizzle out. What's the point of their end? What happened? How did it happen? Who was involved? And so really taking a look at that. And barriers can be those common things, that statements that are made, and they end up becoming these obstacles that are so huge because people feel comfortable. And like I said, this work can be uncomfortable. And so getting people to recognize and accept that discomfort is something that takes some work. But once we get people out of their comfort zone, that's where growth occurs. And so we want to make sure that we're mindful of that. All right. 6, generate short-term wins. So how do leaders recognize, collect, and communicate wins to track progress and energize their volunteers to persist? Well, you have to have those short-term goals, and not only have them, but celebrate them. So just like if we're developing an IEP, there's that opportunity to have those. Once you have your long-term annual goals set up, now we want to look at those benchmarks. We want to look at across time, like how are you doing, and then celebrate all of those wins on the way. And so we want to make sure that these things are very visible, and short-term wins can sort of undermine those people who are cynical and those sort of resistors who really aren't on board. And so if you're always showing the wins, DJ Khaled says, all I do is win, 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 win. And so if you're showing that we're winning and we're continuously winning, even if it's just little things, it silences the cynics. All right. And so we want to make sure that we create space for that. Okay. And a way that we can do this is with SMARTIE goals. I'm sure you guys have seen SMART goals, but SMARTIE goals include inclusive and equitable. And I'm not going to go into depth on this one, but you can Google SMARTIE goal and you'll get this information. Just a little more on SMARTIE goals. just making sure that if the outcome of the specified goal is not specifically promoting equity, is the process of achieving the goal and going to improve equity and inclusion in your district. So just a couple of things to consider when making a goal. And I think someone unmuted. If you could just mute yourself, that would be awesome. All right, number 7, press harder after the first success. So how do leaders use their credibility to improve systems and structures and policies? How can leaders remain relentless until the vision is realized? So as goals are achieved, again, for both large and small, take advantage of the momentum to attack the next barrier or the next task. So now that we've celebrated that win, now we say, all right, so now that we've done that, now let's move on to the next thing and keep that momentum going, sustaining that acceleration. So we're always moving forward, right? Because we're on this journey. So we want to keep our foot on the gas, right? So you driving that Camaro SS, that Corvette Stingray, right? You know, we want to keep it moving forward. And finally is institute change. So we want to make sure that we're replacing old habits with new ones. Access to process outcomes, looking at early warning system data, ensuring that we're really able to take what we've done and maintain it. We want to make sure that we are sustaining the changes and we're not reverting back to what's comfortable. We're not going back to that place of complacency. All right, so I had this bright idea that we would have a breakout room, and I really feel, sorry, let me go back. I really felt good about this. I think that we can do it, just maybe a little less time. What you see on the screen are 2 talking points. So when we go into our breakout rooms, I want you to consider one or the other. How are you building the capacity of those around you to be culturally responsive instructional leaders? If you are not, what can you do or begin to do? The second one, what district policies, structures, biases, and practices do you need to be dismantled in order to provide a more equitable experience for students? All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing, and Shonda, what are you thinking? Can we get into the breakout rooms?
We absolutely can. And do you want 5 or 7 minutes?
Let's go 5 minutes, and I'm going to put in the chat the questions so that folks have them available. So give me 1 second before we go in. Yeah, so we'll do 5 minutes, and you guys just do your best to kind of share a little bit. I would have given much more time if I had it, but we're winding down now, and I want to save time for the questions at the end. So
Sounds good, and the rooms will be open.
thank you so much, Shonda. All right, here we go. 5 minutes, speak your truth, accept and expect non-closure, stay engaged.
Oh,
Everyone click breakout room. It should pop up on your screen. If you don't see it, unmute yourselves and we'll figure it out. Lots of people still hanging out, and we're down to 4 minutes. So we want to make sure we get into our breakout rooms. We're at 3 minutes, 30 seconds. Get into your room so your voice can be heard. If you're having any issues, just unmute yourselves and let me know, or put it in the chat, please.
Oh. Uh,
Still lots of folks in the main room.
oh. And I'm just checking and moving some people around, so there's not just rooms with one person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm assuming folks are either on multiple meetings or they haven't seen it, they are not engaged, or they had an emergency, but we still have lots of folks in the main room. All right, Shonda, we're gonna close now. It's 1:24.
They should be closing in 15 seconds.
Okay.
So they should be coming back. 2, 1. It's doing the 1-minute countdown.
Yeah. I knew I was like pushing it to the wire.
And so far, there aren't questions in the chat, but they might have once they come back from the breakout room.
Right. And so that's what I was thinking, like, then I'll have time.
Mm-hmm.
All right, welcome back. See, folks are returning. Welcome back to the main room. If anything resonated with you in your conversations with your colleagues, I know you didn't have a lot of time, but feel free to put anything that stood out for you in the chat. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. If anything stood out for you, resonated with you as you were engaging with your colleagues, please feel free to put something in the chat that summarizes what you thought, what you heard, what you felt. Welcome back. We're getting there, just a few more folks, probably a few more breakout rooms. They are holding out till the end. If anything resonated with you, please put it in the chat as you engage with your colleagues in the breakout rooms. I'm seeing some comments there. Thank you very much, Kathy and Kevin and Marianne. Welcome back. We're almost there, waiting for a few more folks to come in. More reflecting on how it's applied in our districts. Our staff may or may not look like our students or communities. Disproportionality and identification rates of special education, and creating early warning systems and strong pre-referral interventions. Yes, Carrie, I love that. That if you don't get anything else from anything that I've said, that was like magical. Thank you. We're almost there, still missing some folks, but I think I'm gonna just go ahead and get started. Please continue to put anything that resonated with you in the chat. Okay. All right, so here, I always like to offer actionable intentions. So these are things that you can do to be an equity-oriented change agent. So as the leader in your district, in your building, these are things that you can do. Have an equity attitude. So just this idea that I am making decisions to ensure that every student is getting what they need when they need it. Okay. Initiate courageous conversations about things that you see, things that you hear. Demonstrate persistence, right? And so if you start to make changes in your district and you get some resistance, being persistent and moving forward. Maintain an asset attitude. It's not about those kids who are failing, those kids who always do this, but it's like, how can we define the positives about students? And then maintain a coherent focus, always making sure that we keep the students in the center. Lastly, in the chat, if you don't mind, putting something that you learned or something that was affirmed. Also, if you have questions, you can put those in the chat as well. So something that you learned today and something that was affirmed for you. And I'll put my contact information on the screen, and I will be looking in the chat now to see if there are any questions. Ooh, I like this, Amelia, coaching versus professional development. Make sure teachers are implementing culturally responsive educational practices. Love, love, love coaching versus professional development. Thank you. It's okay to not be okay. Thank you, Pamela. I think that being proactive is a key concept. I think that we tend to be more reactive most of the time. Yes, Carmi, yes. I really like the guidance for the courageous conversations. Thanks, Shonda. Yes. And if you look at Glenn Singleton, Courageous Conversations About Race, you can get more information on them. I felt affirmed when persistence was mentioned. Awesome, Mary Ellen. Importance of building capacity. Yes, Kim, right? Because we want to sustain this work. It's not something that should just fall by the wayside. Dana, dismantling biases takes a whole systemic commitment. And I think I'm at my time, which sucks because I was really enjoying this. Thank you so much for joining me today. And Shonda, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful session. I'm just seeing lots of thank yous, lots of affirmations in the chat. And I want to provide the session code. And that session code is E as in educator, D as in David, S as in summer, R as in red, and 1. And that session code is in the chat now. So please make sure you write down your session code. You will need all of those session codes to complete the survey on day 2 in order to get your Act 48. I'd also like to remind you that you can go to the Leadership Summit webpage in order to get information about upcoming sessions. And I would just like to thank you again for your participation, and thank Dr. Amira Hill Yancey for providing our content. Thank you all so much.